What if I told you that in 1882, a single act of defiance by a black rancher against the U.S. cavalry nearly sparked an international incident? That the woman he saved that day would go on to become one of the most influential peacemakers between Apache tribes and settlers? This is the story they buried in military archives, a tale of when racial hatred, cultural prejudice, and military arrogance collided with one man's unshakable moral compass. The soldiers called him Apache. The Apache called him brother. History tried to forget him entirely. What you're about to witness will challenge everything you thought you knew about courage in the American West. This isn't just another frontier story. It's about a moment when one man's decision changed the course of history between three cultures forced into conflict. Stay until the very end, because the final chapter reveals a twist that historians are still debating today. And if this story impacts you the way it should, please share it with others who need to know these forgotten chapters of American history. If you're new here, I'm bringing you the untold stories of black heroes from America's past on the Black Rancher channel. Hit subscribe now and ring that bell, because these are the stories they never taught you in school, but they're the ones that matter most. Now let's travel back to Arizona Territory, 1882, where a successful black rancher is about to make a decision that will put him on a collision course with the U.S. Army. Arizona Territory, September 1882. Marcus Stone Johnson guided his chestnut stallion along the rocky trail that bordered his property, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the vast expanse of the Triple Crown Ranch. At 41, Marcus was an imposing figure, 6 feet 2 inches of pure muscle, with intelligent dark eyes that missed nothing and hands that could gentle a wild horse or defend his land with equal skill. 15 years ago, he'd been just another freedman with nothing but determination and a small inheritance from his father's service in the Civil War. Now the Triple Crown Ranch sprawled across 3,000 acres of prime Arizona grazing land, home to the finest cattle and horses in the territory. Marcus had earned every acre through back-breaking work, shrewd business deals, and an uncompromising refusal to bow to the racial prejudice that governed frontier society. White ranchers who'd initially dismissed him as another uppity freed slave now grudgingly purchased his superior livestock. His success was a constant thorn in the side of those who believed a black man had no business prospering in the West. "Easy, Ranger," Marcus murmured to his horse as they crested a hill overlooking the trading town of Copper Springs. The settlement bustled with activity, miners, ranchers, merchants, and the ever-present soldiers from nearby Fort Blackwood. Marcus's jaw tightened as he spotted the blue uniforms of the cavalry patrol in the town square. Relations between the army and local Apache bands had grown increasingly tense, with trigger-happy soldiers treating every Native American as a potential enemy. It was a powder keg waiting to explode. As he rode toward town to conduct business at the bank, Marcus noticed commotion near the train station. A crowd had gathered and the harsh voices of soldiers cut through the desert air. "Get back, all of you!" shouted a sergeant with cruel eyes and sergeant's stripes on his dusty blue uniform. "This is military business." Marcus guided Ranger closer, his experienced eye taking in the scene. A young Apache woman, perhaps 19 or 20, sat on the ground near the platform, her hands bound behind her back. Blood trickled from a cut above her left eye, and her traditional doe-skin dress was torn and dirty. 3 soldiers stood over her, the sergeant, a corporal with a scraggly beard, and a young private who looked uncomfortable with the situation. The sergeant held a set of iron shackles in one hand. "What's this about, Sergeant?" asked Tom Bradley, the station master, his voice uncertain. "Found this Apache skulking around Mrs. Henderson's property this morning," the sergeant replied loudly, ensuring the growing crowd could hear. "Probably scouting for her war party. Orders are to take any hostiles to Fort Blackwood for questioning." Marcus dismounted and moved closer, his keen eyes studying the young woman. Despite her injuries and predicament, she sat with dignity, her dark eyes defiant rather than afraid. There was something in her bearing that spoke of nobility. This was no common scout or raider. "Sergeant Mills," Marcus called out, recognizing the man from previous unpleasant encounters. "That woman doesn't look like a warrior to me." The crowd turned as Marcus approached, conversations dying away. Several townspeople stepped back unconsciously, not from fear, but from the tension that always crackled when Marcus Johnson confronted authority. Sergeant Mills's face darkened. "Well, well, if it isn't the uppity rancher. This ain't your concern, boy. Move along." Marcus bristled at the slur but kept his voice level. "The name is Mr. Johnson, Sergeant, and everything that happens in this town concerns me. I pay taxes here, I do business here, and I vote here." The young Apache woman's eyes shifted to Marcus, studying him with sharp intelligence. She spoke in clear, accented English. "I am not a warrior. I came to trade, not to fight." "Shut your mouth," the corporal snarled, raising his hand to strike her. Marcus stepped forward, his voice cutting like steel. "Touch her and you'll answer to me." The crowd grew silent, sensing the dangerous undercurrent in the confrontation. Sergeant Mills's hand moved closer to his sidearm. "You threatening a United States soldier, boy?" Mills asked with a sneer. "I'm preventing an assault on an unarmed woman," Marcus replied calmly. "And if you call me boy again, Sergeant, we're going to have a different kind of problem." Young Private Patterson fidgeted nervously. "Sergeant, maybe we should—" "Shut up, Patterson," Mills barked, never taking his eyes off Marcus. "This darky thinks he can tell the army what to do." Marcus's hands remained relaxed at his sides, but everyone present could sense the coiled power in his stance. He'd learned to fight in the war, refined his skills in a dozen frontier towns, and survived precisely because he never backed down from bullies, regardless of their uniforms. "What's your evidence she's done anything wrong?" Marcus asked reasonably. "Found her on Henderson property. That's enough." "The Henderson place borders Apache tribal land," Marcus pointed out. "Unless there's a specific charge, you have no legal authority to arrest her." The station master, Tom Bradley, cleared his throat nervously. "Actually, Sergeant, Mr. Johnson's right about the jurisdiction. If she was just on the boundary—" "Whose side are you on, Bradley?" Mills snarled. Marcus crouched down near the Apache woman, speaking quietly in the few Apache words he'd learned from trading with peaceful bands. "Are you hurt, badly?" Her eyes widened slightly in surprise. In English, she replied, "I will survive, but they plan to take me to the fort." Marcus had heard the stories about what happened to Apache captives at Fort Blackwood. Commander Wilson believed in harsh interrogations and had little regard for the rights of Native Americans. This young woman would be lucky to survive a week. Standing slowly, Marcus faced the soldiers again. "She's coming with me." The crowd gasped. Even by frontier standards, openly defying the cavalry was dangerous, especially for a black man, no matter how successful. Sergeant Mills laughed harshly. "Like hell she is. She's our prisoner." "On what charges?" Marcus pressed. "Trespassing? Where's your warrant? Spying? Where's your evidence? Being Apache in Apache territory?" "We don't need warrants for hostiles," the corporal spat. "She's not hostile," Marcus said firmly. "She's injured, unarmed, and was apparently engaged in legitimate trade." He looked around at the crowd. "How many of you have traded with peaceful Apache bands? How many of you know the difference between warriors and civilians?" Several townspeople shifted uncomfortably. Many had indeed traded with Apaches, and this young woman clearly wasn't dressed for war. "Mr. Johnson," came a voice from the crowd. Marcus turned to see Judge Harrison pushing through the onlookers. The elderly judge was one of the few authority figures in Copper Springs who treated Marcus with respect. "Judge," Marcus nodded. Harrison studied the scene carefully. "Sergeant Mills, what specific crime has this woman committed?" "She was found on private property, Judge. In times of tension, that makes her suspicious." "Suspicious isn't a crime," Harrison replied dryly. "Was she armed? Did she steal anything? Did she threaten anyone?" Mills hesitated. "Well?" "No, but—" "Then you have no legal grounds to arrest her," the judge ruled. "If Mrs. Henderson wants to press trespassing charges, she can swear out a complaint. Until then, this woman is free to go." "Judge, with respect, this is a military matter," Mills protested. "This is a civilian matter in a civilian court," Harrison corrected firmly, "unless martial law has been declared, which it hasn't." Marcus felt a surge of gratitude toward the old judge, but he knew this was far from over. Mills wasn't the type to accept defeat gracefully. "Fine," Mills said, his voice dripping with malice. "But when Apache raiders hit this town, remember who protected them." He pointed at Marcus. "And you, Johnson. You just made yourself an enemy of the United States Army." "I made myself an enemy of corrupt soldiers," Marcus corrected. "There's a difference." As the soldiers reluctantly began to withdraw, Marcus knelt beside the Apache woman and carefully cut her bonds with his knife. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I am Aiyana. It means eternal blossom in my language." "Marcus Johnson," he replied. "Can you stand?" She rose gracefully despite her injuries. "I can ride. My horse is hidden near the river." Marcus glanced around. Many townspeople were dispersing, but he noticed several men lingering, rough-looking characters who often did business with the soldiers. His instincts told him trouble wasn't over. "Miss Aiyana," he said formally, "I'd be honored if you'd accept my escort back to safe territory. I don't trust those soldiers to give up easily." Her eyes met his, and Marcus saw intelligence, strength, and something else. Recognition of a kindred spirit who understood what it meant to stand alone against prejudice. "I would welcome your protection, Mr. Johnson, but know this, helping me may bring danger to your ranch." Marcus smiled grimly. "Danger and I are old friends. Besides, some things are worth the risk." As they walked toward the river to retrieve her horse, neither Marcus nor Aiyana noticed Sergeant Mills watching from the shadows, his hand resting on his pistol grip, or the small group of rough men who began following at a distance. The sun was already beginning its descent toward the western mountains. Time was running short, and the real confrontation was yet to come. As they walked along the dusty path toward the river, Aiyana moved with the fluid grace of someone raised in harmony with the desert landscape. Despite her injuries, she showed no weakness, a pride that Marcus recognized and respected. "You speak English very well," Marcus observed as they navigated around a cluster of barrel cacti. "My grandmother was Mexican, captured as a child by Apache raiders and raised as one of us," Aiyana explained. "She taught me Spanish and English, believing knowledge of other languages would help our people survive in a changing world." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "Wise woman. Education is the one thing they can't take away from you. You speak some Apache words. How?" "I trade with Chief Naiche's band when they come through in winter. Nothing major, coffee, sugar, sometimes medical supplies. Your people have always dealt fairly with me." Aiyana stopped walking and studied him with those penetrating dark eyes. "You said your people. Most whites say those savages, or the hostiles." Marcus met her gaze steadily. "I know what it's like to be judged by the color of your skin rather than the content of your character. Seems to me Apache people and black people have more in common than either group has with folks who think they're superior just because they were born white." A small smile played at the corners of Aiyana's mouth, the first sign of warmth she'd shown. "Chief Naiche speaks of you. He calls you Stone Bear, strong as stone, protective as a mother bear." "Stone Bear," Marcus repeated, chuckling. "I like that better than what Sergeant Mills calls me." They reached the river bend where Aiyana had hidden her horse, a magnificent paint mare with intelligent eyes and perfect conformation. "Beautiful animal," Marcus said admiringly. "Her name is Ciala, Little Star," Aiyana replied, running her hands along the mare's neck. "She was a gift from my father for my 18th birthday." Marcus helped her check the horse's tack, noting the quality of the leatherwork and the silver decorations on the bridle. "Your father must be a man of some importance." Aiyana's expression grew complex. "He is Chief Nalnish of the White Mountain Band. What you might call a minor chief." Marcus raised an eyebrow. He'd learned enough about Apache culture to know that minor chief was likely false modesty. The White Mountain Band was one of the most influential Apache groups, and their leaders were chosen for wisdom and capability, not birthright. "So I've been rescuing Apache royalty," he said with a grin. "There is no royalty among my people," Aiyana replied seriously. "Leadership is earned through service and wisdom. But yes, I am my father's daughter, and that makes some soldiers nervous." Marcus understood immediately. Capturing the daughter of an influential chief could be seen as either a diplomatic coup or an act of war depending on how it was handled. "Miss Aiyana," he said carefully, "what were you really doing near the Henderson place?" She hesitated, then seemed to reach a decision. "Mrs. Henderson's youngest daughter has been very sick. High fever, breathing problems. Their doctor gave up hope, but my grandmother knew herbs that might help. Mrs. Henderson sent word through traders asking for our assistance." Marcus felt pieces clicking into place. "So you were on a mission of mercy." "I brought medicine, gave instructions to Mrs. Henderson's eldest daughter. The child was improving when the soldiers arrived." Aiyana's voice turned bitter. "They accused me of poisoning the girl." "Jesus," Marcus muttered. The army's paranoia was getting people killed, literally. A sound from the bushes made both of them freeze. Marcus's hand moved instinctively to his Colt 45, while Aiyana grabbed her horse's reins. 3 men emerged from the scrub brush, the same rough characters Marcus had noticed lingering in town. They were armed and spread out in a classic intimidation formation. "Well, well," said the largest man, a bearded brute with gold teeth and a scar across his left cheek. "Looks like we found ourselves an Indian lover and his squaw." Marcus stepped protectively in front of Aiyana. "You boys lost?" "Now we know exactly where we are," Gold Teeth replied with an ugly laugh. "See, Sergeant Mills figured you might try to help this Apache bitch escape. Offered us $50 each to make sure that don't happen." "60 if we bring back her scalp," added the second man, a wiry fellow with nervous eyes and tobacco-stained teeth. Marcus felt the familiar calm that always settled over him before violence. His voice became deadly quiet. "Gentlemen, you have about 10 seconds to mount up and ride away. After that, I start shooting." The third man, younger than the others but with the cold eyes of a killer, laughed. 3 against 1, darky. I like those odds." "You're forgetting the lady," Marcus said calmly. Behind him, Aiyana spoke in Apache, and Marcus heard the distinctive sound of a knife being drawn from its sheath. Gold Teeth's expression grew nastier. "Bring 'em both down, boys. Dead's easier than alive anyway." The 3 men went for their guns simultaneously. Marcus drew with the fluid speed of someone who'd practiced the motion 10,000 times. His Colt cleared leather and fired before any of the bounty hunters had their weapons fully drawn. Gold Teeth spun and fell, clutching his shoulder. The nervous man got his gun out, but hesitated when he saw his leader down. That hesitation cost him, as Aiyana's throwing knife took him in the gun arm, spinning him around and dropping his weapon. The young killer was fast, very fast. He got his shot off, the bullet whining past Marcus's ear close enough to burn, but Marcus's second shot was perfectly placed, taking the man center mass and dropping him permanently. The wounded nervous man was trying to reach his dropped pistol with his offhand when Marcus's boot stepped on his wrist. "I wouldn't," Marcus advised calmly. Gold Teeth was groaning on the ground, blood seeping through his fingers. "How you shot me, you bastard?" "I could have killed you," Marcus pointed out. "Consider yourself lucky." Aiyana retrieved her knife, cleaning it carefully on a handful of grass. "Sergeant Mills will send more men." Marcus nodded grimly. He'd crossed a line today, and there would be consequences. How far to safe Apache territory? 2 hours hard riding to reach our scouts, but Marcus, she used his first name for the first time. If soldiers follow us onto tribal land, it could mean war. Marcus looked at the wounded men, then at the sun sinking lower in the sky. Every minute that passed gave the army more time to organize a pursuit. "Then we'd better make sure they don't follow us," he said decisively. "Before we continue with Marcus and Aiyana's desperate race against time, I want to remind you that these stories of courage and cross-cultural understanding aren't just entertainment, they're missing pieces of American history. Real people like Marcus Johnson existed throughout the West, building bridges between communities while facing prejudice from all sides. Their stories matter because they show us that heroism comes in all colors, and that sometimes the greatest acts of courage happen when ordinary people choose to do what's right instead of what's safe. If you're finding value in this untold chapter of history, please share this video with others and subscribe to the Black Rancher channel for more forgotten stories that shaped the real American West. Now, Let's see how our heroes plan to evade an entire cavalry unit before sundown. Marcus quickly assessed their situation. The wounded men would eventually make their way back to town, probably within an hour. Sergeant Mills would use their failure as justification to mobilize a full pursuit, claiming Marcus had allied with hostiles and attacked United States citizens. "We need to move fast and smart," Marcus said, helping Aiyana mount her paint mare. "Can you ride hard with those injuries?" "Apache women learn to ride before we can walk properly," she replied with a slight smile. "I will keep up." Marcus swung onto Ranger and studied the terrain. The direct route to Apache territory led across open ground, where cavalry could easily track them. But there was another way, more dangerous, but offering better concealment. "The Devil's Canyon Trail," he said, thinking aloud. Aiyana's eyes widened. "That path is treacherous even in daylight. At dusk, it's also the last place soldiers will expect us to go. They'll assume we took the easy route." As they spurred their horses toward the rocky canyon entrance, Marcus's mind was already working through the implications of his actions. By this time tomorrow, he'd likely be branded an outlaw. His ranch would be forfeit, his life's work destroyed. But looking at Aiyana's determined profile as she rode beside him, Marcus felt no regret. Some principles were worth more than property. The canyon walls rose around them, painted in shades of red and gold by the setting sun. The trail was indeed treacherous, barely wide enough for single file with loose rocks that could send a horse tumbling into the abyss below. "Marcus?" Aiyana called softly as they navigated a particularly narrow passage. "Why are you doing this? You could have walked away." Marcus considered the question as Ranger picked his way carefully around a boulder. "My father was born a slave in Georgia, escaped when I was 12, brought our family north. He used to tell me that freedom isn't something you get, it's something you practice every day." "I don't understand." "He meant that real freedom comes from making choices based on what's right, not on what's safe or profitable or popular." Marcus paused as they reached a wider section of trail. Today, walking away would have been the safe choice, but it wouldn't have been free. Aiyana nodded slowly. "My grandmother says something similar. The heart that fears the thorns will never hold the rose." Behind them, echoing off the canyon walls, came the distant sound of horses and shouted orders. The pursuit had begun sooner than Marcus expected. "They're tracking us," Aiyana observed calmly. Marcus listened to the sounds. At least a dozen riders. "Mills brought more men than I thought." The trail ahead split into two paths, one leading toward Apache territory, the other toward the high country where old mining claims lay abandoned. "If we take the direct route, they'll catch us in the open," Marcus said. "But if we head for the mining district, there are places to hide," Aiyana finished, "and my people sometimes use the old mine shafts to store supplies." They chose the mining trail, pushing their horses hard as the sun continued its descent. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew closer. As they crested a ridge overlooking the abandoned Golden Eagle mine, Marcus spotted something that made his blood run cold. A second group of soldiers approaching from the east, cutting off their escape route to Apache lands. "They've split their force," he told Aiyana grimly. "We're caught between two groups." Aiyana studied the terrain with tactical eyes that spoke of training in guerrilla warfare. "The mine entrance is narrow. If we could reach it, we'd be trapped inside." "Not necessarily. These mountains are full of connected tunnels. My people have mapped many of them." Marcus looked at the sun, now touching the horizon. Maybe 30 minutes of daylight left. In full darkness, the advantage would shift to Aiyana, who'd grown up in this country. "Can you get us through the mines to the other side of the mountain?" "I think so." "But Marcus..." Her voice carried a warning. "Some of those tunnels haven't been used in years. Cave-ins, bad air, underground rivers." A rifle shot echoed across the valley, the bullet striking stone 20 feet away. "Better than certain death out here," Marcus decided. They spurred their horses down the steep slope toward the mine entrance, loose shale sliding beneath their animals' hooves. Behind them, soldiers from both groups converged on their position. Sergeant Mills's voice carried across the rocks. "Give up, Johnson, you're surrounded." Marcus and Aiyana reached the mine entrance just as the first soldiers crested the ridge above them. The abandoned buildings provided temporary cover, but not for long. "This way," Aiyana said, dismounting near a partially collapsed shaft entrance. "We'll have to lead the horses." The mine entrance was a black mouth in the mountainside, barely wide enough for their mounts. As they led Ranger and Ciala into the darkness, Marcus heard soldiers approaching the mine buildings. "They went into the mountain," someone shouted. "Damn fools," came Mills's voice. "They'll be dead by morning if we don't get them first." Inside the tunnel, Marcus struck a match, revealing rough-hewn walls and timber supports that looked decades old. The air smelled of bat guano and mineral deposits. "How well do you really know these tunnels?" he asked quietly. Aiyana's eyes reflected the match flame. "Well enough, but we'll need torches and luck." Behind them, the sound of boots on stone announced that the soldiers were following them into the mines. The race against Sundown had become a race against time itself, in the black heart of the mountain, where one wrong turn could mean burial alive. The match flickered and died, plunging them into absolute darkness. Marcus heard Aiyana moving confidently ahead, her soft footsteps echoing off the tunnel walls. "Wait here," she whispered. "There should be old torches in the supply cache." Marcus held both horses' reins, listening to the sounds of pursuit growing closer. Sergeant Mills and his men were moving more slowly, unfamiliar with the mine's layout, but they were coming. A small flame sparked ahead. Aiyana had found not just torches, but an old oil lamp. The yellow glow revealed a wider chamber, with multiple tunnel entrances branching off like the arms of an octopus. "My people use this place during the winter hunts," she explained, lighting a second torch. "These tunnels connect to the Apache stronghold on the other side of the mountain." Marcus studied the branching passages. "How do we know which way?" Aiyana pointed to small marks carved into the stone near each entrance, symbols that looked like combinations of scratches and curves. "Apache trail signs. This one leads to water, this one to a dead end, this one—" She paused at the central tunnel. "This one leads home." Behind them, torchlight flickered as soldiers entered the mine. Marcus counted at least 3 separate light sources. "Johnson!" Mills's voice echoed off the stone walls. "Come out now and we'll make it quick. Stay in there and you'll die slow." "Promises, promises," Marcus muttered, checking his ammunition. He had 18 rounds left for his Colt, plus a Winchester rifle with a full magazine. Not much for a prolonged fight. Aiyana had armed herself with her knife and a wicked-looking war hatchet from the supply cache. "The tunnel narrows about 50 yards ahead," she said. "If we can reach that point—" A rifle shot boomed in the confined space, the bullet ricocheting off stone walls with deadly whines. Marcus pushed both horses deeper into the central tunnel as soldiers began spreading out through the chamber. "Take the Apache alive if possible," Mills ordered. "But if Johnson resists, kill him." Marcus and Aiyana moved quickly through the tunnel, their combined torchlight revealing a passage that gradually narrowed until they had to walk single file. The horses were becoming skittish in the confined space, their breathing loud in the echoing darkness. After what felt like an eternity but was probably 10 minutes, they reached the narrow section Aiyana had mentioned. Here, the tunnel was barely wide enough for one person, with rough stone walls that scraped their shoulders. "Perfect," Marcus said, studying the natural bottleneck. "They can only come at us one at a time." He positioned himself at the narrow entrance, while Aiyana continued forward with the horses. The sound of pursuit was getting closer. Boots on stone, muffled voices, the occasional clatter of equipment. The first soldier appeared around a bend in the tunnel, torch held high, rifle ready. Marcus recognized the young private, Patterson, who'd looked uncomfortable during the confrontation in town. "Don't do this, son," Marcus called out. "You don't seem like the type who enjoys murder." Patterson hesitated, lowering his rifle slightly. "Mr. Johnson, Sergeant Mills says you're working with hostiles." "I'm protecting an innocent woman from men who wanted to abuse her," Marcus replied. "You know the difference between right and wrong, Private. Which side of this do you want to be on?" "Patterson!" Mills's voice boomed from behind. "What's the hold-up?" The young soldier's face was conflicted in the torchlight. "Sergeant, maybe you should follow orders." Mills appeared behind Patterson, shoving him forward. "Take him down!" Patterson raised his rifle reluctantly, but his heart wasn't in it. Marcus saw the hesitation and acted on it, lunging forward to knock the weapon aside. The rifle discharged harmlessly into the ceiling, bringing down a shower of loose rock. Marcus grappled with Patterson, trying not to hurt the boy while using him as a shield against Mills. Behind the sergeant, other soldiers crowded the tunnel, unable to get a clear shot. "Let me through," Mills snarled, pushing forward with his pistol drawn. Marcus spun Patterson around and gave him a hard shove back toward his commanding officer. The two soldiers collided, and in the confusion, Marcus drew his Colt and fired 2 quick shots, not to kill but to force the soldiers back around the bend. "Aiyana!" he called. "How much farther?" 20 minutes to the exit," came her voice from ahead. "But there's a problem." Marcus didn't like the sound of that. He fired another shot to keep the soldiers pinned down, then retreated deeper into the narrow passage. Behind him, Mills was organizing his men for a coordinated assault. Marcus could hear the sergeant's tactical planning. Some men would advance directly, while others tried to find alternate routes through the mine. He caught up with Aiyana at a wider section where she stood holding both horses. Her expression was grim. "The main tunnel is blocked," she reported. "Recent cave-in, maybe from that thunderstorm last week." Marcus studied the pile of rubble that completely sealed the passage. "Any other way out?" "There's an old ventilation shaft about 100 yards back, but it's vertical. We'd have to abandon the horses." The sound of approaching soldiers was getting closer. Marcus made a quick decision. "We can't leave Ranger and Ciala. Those animals would die down here." Aiyana nodded understanding. "Then we fight our way out. Or..." Marcus studied the collapsed tunnel, an idea forming. "How unstable is the rock around here?" "Very. The miners always complained about cave-ins." Marcus smiled grimly, pulling a stick of dynamite from his saddlebags, standard equipment for a rancher who sometimes needed to clear stumps or blast water holes. "Think you can get the horses to that ventilation shaft and wait for my signal?" Aiyana's eyes widened as she understood his plan. "Marcus, you could bring down the whole mountain." "Just enough to seal this tunnel behind us." He handed her his Winchester. "If I don't make it out, get to your people. Tell them what really happened here." "We go together or not at all," she said firmly, taking the rifle but staying at his side. The torchlight of the approaching soldiers was visible around the bend now. Mills's voice echoed through the tunnel. "No more games, Johnson. Surrender now." Marcus positioned the dynamite at the base of a key support timber, using his remaining matches to light the short fuse. "When I say run," he told Aiyana, "we run like our lives depend on it, because they do." The fuse hissed and sparked in the darkness as soldiers rounded the bend, weapons raised. "Run!" Marcus shouted. The explosion behind them sounded like the wrath of God in the confined tunnel. The shockwave knocked Marcus and Aiyana flat as tons of rock crashed down, sealing off the passage and trapping Sergeant Mills and his men on the other side. Dust filled the air, making breathing difficult. Their horses reared in panic, but the sound of falling rock was already fading to a distant rumble. "Are you hurt?" Marcus asked, helping Aiyana to her feet. She coughed, wiping dust from her eyes. "Bruised, but alive. You?" Marcus checked himself over. His ears were ringing, and he'd scraped his hands badly, but nothing was broken. Still in one piece. Behind them, they could hear muffled shouts from the other side of the cave-in. Mills and his men were alive, but effectively trapped. It would take them hours to dig through or find another route. "The ventilation shaft is this way," Aiyana said, retrieving their torch from where it had fallen. They led their horses through a maze of smaller tunnels, following Apache trail markers that had been carved into the stone decades earlier. The air grew fresher as they climbed, indicating they were approaching the surface. The ventilation shaft was exactly as Aiyana had described, a nearly vertical climb through a natural chimney in the rock. Handholds had been carved into the stone, creating a primitive ladder that disappeared into darkness above. "The horses can make it," Aiyana said, examining the shaft. "It's steep, but there are ledges where they can rest." Marcus looked up dubiously. "You sure about this?" "Apache horses are bred for mountain terrain. Trust me." The climb took nearly an hour. with the horses struggling but managing the steep ascent. Several times Marcus thought they would have to abandon the animals, but Aiyana's knowledge of horse psychology and the natural intelligence of the animals saw them through. When they finally emerged from the mountainside, the last rays of sunlight were painting the western sky in shades of orange and purple. They had made it. Barely. "Look," Aiyana said, pointing toward the valley below. Marcus followed her gaze and saw them, Apache warriors on horseback, moving through the desert with the fluid grace of shadows. Even at this distance, he could see they were painted for war. "Your father's men?" he asked. Aiyana nodded grimly. "When I didn't return by sunset, he would have sent search parties. If they encounter the soldiers..." Marcus understood the implications immediately. The Apache had come looking for a missing chief's daughter and found evidence of a military confrontation. If they discovered soldiers had tried to capture and possibly kill Aiyana, it would be seen as an act of war. "We need to reach them before they find Mills and his men," Marcus said urgently. They mounted their exhausted horses and began the descent down the mountainside. The Apache warriors had spotted them now. Marcus could see riders breaking away from the main group, approaching at speed. The lead warrior was an imposing figure on a black war horse, his face painted with traditional designs, a magnificent war bonnet trailing eagle feathers. Even before Aiyana called out in Apache, Marcus knew this had to be Chief Nalnish himself. The warriors surrounded them in moments, weapons drawn, suspicious eyes fixed on Marcus. The tension was palpable. These men were ready for war and looking for an enemy to fight. Chief Nalnish spoke rapidly in Apache, his voice heavy with concern and barely controlled anger. Aiyana responded in the same language, gesturing toward Marcus and back toward the mountain. Marcus sat perfectly still, hands visible and empty, while the conversation continued. He caught a few words he recognized. His Apache name, Stone Bear, references to soldiers, and what sounded like expressions of gratitude. Finally, Chief Nalnish turned to Marcus and spoke in accented but clear English. "My daughter tells me you risked everything to protect her from soldiers who would have harmed her." "Any decent man would have done the same, Chief," Marcus replied respectfully. "Many decent men stood and watched," the chief corrected. "You acted. This is different." One of the younger warriors said something urgent in Apache, pointing toward the mountain. In the distance, Marcus could see torchlight moving. Mills and his men had found another way out of the mine. Chief Nalnish's expression darkened. "These soldiers still pursue my daughter?" "They won't give up easily," Marcus admitted. "Their sergeant believes capturing Aiyana would be a military victory." The chief's hand moved to his war axe. Around them, the other warriors tensed, ready for his command to attack. "Father," Aiyana said quickly in English, clearly wanting Marcus to understand. "Stone Bear spoke of another way. Not all problems require bloodshed." Marcus had been thinking the same thing. "Chief, what if there was a way to end this without war? A way that would protect your daughter and teach those soldiers a lesson they'll never forget?" Chief Nalnish studied Marcus with intelligent eyes. "Speak your thoughts, Stone Bear." Marcus pointed toward the approaching torchlight. "Those soldiers are lost, injured, and running out of water. By morning, they'll be desperate. What if, instead of attacking them, your warriors simply watched them? Let them stumble around in the desert, getting more lost and more frightened?" A smile played at the corners of the chief's mouth. "Continue." "Meanwhile, I ride back to town and have a conversation with their commanding officer. Explain that his men violated civilian law, attacked a peaceful trading mission, and are now missing because of their own incompetence. And if this commanding officer refuses to listen?" Marcus's expression grew hard. "Then I remind him that starting a war over one sergeant's prejudice might not look good in his official reports to Washington." Chief Nalnish laughed, a sound like distant thunder. "You think like Apache, Stone Bear. Strike where the enemy is weakest." "Politics," Aiyana said with understanding. "You want to make the army choose between justice and covering up their mistakes." "Exactly. No commanding officer wants to explain to his superiors why his men started a war because they couldn't tell the difference between a healer and a warrior." The chief considered this for several moments, watching the distant torchlight. Finally, he spoke rapid commands in Apache. His warriors spread out in a wide circle, taking positions that would allow them to monitor the soldiers without being seen. "My men will ensure the soldiers do not harm anyone else tonight," Chief Nalnish said, "but they will not attack unless attacked first. You have until dawn to make this work, Stonebear." "And if it doesn't work?" Marcus asked. The chief's smile was sharp as his war axe. "Then we do things the Apache way." As the warriors melted into the darkness, Aiyana moved her horse closer to Marcus. "You're taking a great risk. If the commanding officer doesn't listen, then I'll have learned something important about the kind of man he is," Marcus replied. "Either way, we'll have prevented a war tonight." Chief Nalnish approached them one final time. "Stonebear, my daughter tells me you have lost much today. Your safety, perhaps your home, certainly your peace." Marcus nodded. "Some prices are worth paying. Among my people, when a man shows such courage in protecting our family, he becomes family." The chief's expression grew formal. "If you are ever in need of sanctuary, you will find it among the Apache. This I swear by the sacred mountains." "Thank you, Chief. That means more than you know." As Marcus prepared to ride toward town, Aiyana called his name. When he turned, she rode close enough to speak quietly. "The medicine I brought Mrs. Henderson, it worked. Her daughter recovered completely." Marcus smiled. "I had a feeling it would. When this is over, would you like to learn more about Apache healing ways? I could teach you." "I'd be honored," Marcus replied honestly. "Maybe you could teach me more Apache words too. I have a feeling I'll be needing them." As he rode away toward Copper Springs, Marcus could see the first stars appearing in the darkening sky. Behind him, Apache warriors moved like ghosts through the desert, ensuring that Sergeant Mills and his men would spend a very long, very educational night learning what it felt like to be hunted. Ahead lay the harder challenge, convincing a military commander that justice was more important than prejudice and that some stories were too dangerous to bury. The sun had set, but Marcus Johnson's work was far from over. What happened next became legend among both the Apache and the Buffalo Soldiers, a story of how one man's refusal to accept injustice changed the relationship between three communities forever. Marcus Johnson's stand that day didn't just save Aiyana, it prevented a war and opened new channels of understanding between peoples who had been forced into conflict. The commanding officer at Fort Blackwood, when faced with the choice between supporting corruption or upholding military honor, made the right decision. Sergeant Mills was court-martialed and dismissed from service. The three bounty hunters who survived were prosecuted for assault, and a new policy was established requiring proper evidence before any arrests could be made on tribal lands. But perhaps most importantly, Marcus Johnson's courage inspired others, both white and black settlers, to question their assumptions about Native Americans and to seek cooperation instead of conflict. History books won't tell you about Marcus Johnson or Chief Nalnish or the brave Apache healer named Aiyana. These stories were buried because they didn't fit the narrative of inevitable conflict that justified so much violence and land theft. But now you know. You know that there were alternatives to hatred, that bridges could be built between communities, and that sometimes the greatest act of patriotism is standing up to your own country's worst impulses. If this story moved you, if it challenged what you thought you knew about the American West, then please share it with others. Hit that like button, share this video with friends and family, and help us bring these forgotten heroes back into the light where they belong. Subscribe to the Black Rancher channel and ring that notification bell, because every week we're uncovering more stories like this, stories of courage, dignity, and hope from America's hidden past. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Thank you for caring about the complete story of our nation, not just the sanitized version, and thank you for helping ensure that heroes like Marcus Johnson and Aiyana are finally remembered for the courage they showed when it mattered most. Until next time, remember, true heroism isn't about the color of your skin or the uniform you wear. It's about choosing to do what's right when everything else tells you to look the other way. This is the Black Rancher, reminding you that the best stories are the ones they tried to erase.